Hello and welcome to my video channel. My name is Mark, I'm 54 years old and I live with my wife and our little dog Ted in a beautiful county called Cumbria in the north of England. This is my first attempt at making a YouTube video, so please be gentle with me. I'm still coming to terms with the technology, but I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, then please like and subscribe. 2 years ago, my life changed forever. It was something that happened unexpectedly, and certainly I'm still coming to terms with it now. And I guess to a certain extent, this is my attempt at trying to make sense of it all. I won't go into too much detail now, but what I want to do to start with is explain a little bit about myself by way of an introduction. I was born and brought up in North Yorkshire, which is a county in the north of England, and I went to school in the 1970s, the late 1970s and early 80s. School was a really happy time for me. I was fairly unremarkable at school, did okay, got O-levels, got A-levels, and did enough to get to university. I guess at an early age, I was always very much into sport and played football for the school teams and played football for local teams as well. And certainly my parents very much encouraged that from an early age. Somehow I managed to get myself into a really good university in the UK, and I continued playing sport all the way through my university career, probably at the expense of my studies, certainly in the first and the second year. And I left university in 1991 with a decent degree, but pretty much no idea what I wanted to do from that point onwards. Then in 1992, when I was only 22, my father died. He was only 59 at the time. 4 years previous, at 55, he'd had a heart attack. And at that time, he'd taken up cycling again. He'd been a very keen cyclist back in his youth, both racing and time trialling on a regular basis. And when he was 55, this was about 1988, he decided to take up cycling again in order to improve his fitness and rehabilitate from his first heart attack. So from the age of 55 to 59, he'd done a lot of cycling, and in fact he'd done a lot of charity rides for children's heart charities for the local hospitals around where we lived. And in that 4 years between 1988 and 1992, we did a lot of riding together. In fact, we did 4 or 5 quite large charity rides, which were supported by a lot of local minor celebrities, including a fairly major celebrity, Beryl Burton, who was the 7-time world women's cycling champion and an absolute demigod to any cyclists and Yorkshire people in general. But sadly, in 1992, as I said, when he was 59, Dad had a second heart attack when he was out on his bike training for his latest charity ride, which took his life. And that event in itself, it could be said, was a pretty defining moment in my life then. I was only 22, and to be fair, it's probably still is a defining moment in my life. My dad was 59 at the time, I was 22, and I decided at that point that by the time that I'd got to the age of 50, whatever I had made in my life, I would prioritise time as the most important life asset and take a step back and prioritise that. In my 20s, I really threw myself into my work and my career. I managed to get onto a training scheme with a very large corporate and spent several years clawing my way up the career ladder, but also travelling a lot around the UK, and I couldn't really settle. Towards the end of my late 20s, I actually made the decision to leave that particular company and join a company which had a bit more stability in terms of my location. And they were also going to fund me on an MBA program, which was something that I was quite keen on doing at the time. I spent a year with this company, and it was clear that they cut the funding on the MBA. So I thought, right, I'm going to go and do this myself. So I took a year out and self-funded an MBA at a really decent management school in the UK. So I took a year out. At that time, I think my life was at a bit of a crossroads. I was fairly burnt out from 10 years of work in the corporate sector, and I just needed a change, as I think a lot of people did who were taking a year out to do an MBA at that time. There were some great people on that course from all walks of life, from ex-military, there were city traders, there were shopkeepers, you name it. There were all walks of life, and it was great to be part of that whole studying society with a lot of wide experience that was coming together. I finished my MBA, did really well, got a distinction, and won a university prize for strategic management by some fluke. And I came out thinking, right, I need to do something different now. I want to come out of my previous career sector and look at doing something a bit more strategic, possibly something with financial accounting. And within a year, I'd ended up straight back where I was before, in a slightly more senior job, but nevertheless the same sector. So it didn't really achieve what I set out to do. So within another year, I took a further year out and went around the world. I sold everything that I had. I had a house. I cashed in the small pension that I had. This was 2001, and just basically liquidized all of the material assets that I had. So all I had was just a rucksack and a round the world ticket, and headed off to Nepal and spent the following year having a fabulous adventure, climbing, tramping, skiing, and just doing all of the things that I wanted to do. And I eventually ended up spending 7 months in New Zealand, tramping and skiing and climbing the length of the North and the South Island, and gaining some really valuable skills. I came back from New Zealand and it was 2001, and the only thing I knew at that time was that I wanted to go back home to Yorkshire, and I wasn't interested in a particular senior position from a career point of view. I quite simply just wanted to pay my way, save up some money, get back on the housing ladder, and kind of restart my life at 31 as it was then. And so I moved back to my hometown, rented a small flat, and effectively started again. Started working for a local business, was really happy there. But within 4 or 5 years, I kind of got to the position of associate director level. So I'd gone quite senior quite quickly. But the difference was, I think I'd got a lot more balance in my life in terms of work-life balance. And during that time, I really started to pursue sport a lot more seriously. I'd cycled pretty much since the age of 13, and I'd always had racing bikes. I'd always wanted to go fast. When I was in my youth, I used to time trial and do the odd race here and there. But when I was in my 30s, I started training a bit more consistently, and I was also running a lot. I was running every day, between 5 and 10k every day, and I started doing a lot of local 10ks and my 10k times were coming down from an hour. I just wanted to beat an hour when I first started running, but eventually they kind of came down to the 45-minute mark, then they came down to the 42-minute mark, and then it was the 40-minute mark, and then I eventually topped out. My personal best at a 10k was 36 minutes 36 seconds, which I was pretty chuffed with at the time. But I was also cycling a lot as well, and I was using that to supplement my running in terms of cross training. So I started on this adventure in multisports, and I was never a very good swimmer, and I couldn't be bothered with it. It was a bit boring to me and a bit technical. But I found out about a sport called duathlon, which is just the running and the cycling elements of multisport rather than swimming, cycling and running. So this duathlon was a run, bike, run, and typically it would be a 10k run, a 40k bike, followed by a 5k run. And they're quite intense events, and I got into this in a very big way, and for 4 or 5 years I did a lot of national competitions, and in 2006, 2007 I actually had a British ranking. I was ranked 9th overall in the country as an age grouper duathlete, and in 2007 I was actually the top ranked 35 to 39 year old duathlete in the country, and I had the honour of representing Great Britain at age group level in 2 European championships, the first of which in Edinburgh in June of 2007 was an interesting affair. It was the height of summer, but it might as well have been middle of winter in Edinburgh, and I trained hard to get there, but the actual event itself, I was just more interested in being there and not necessarily competing. But nevertheless, I still came 11th in my age group, and I came away from that a little bit deflated, thinking, well, where's the next challenge coming from? So I regrouped over the winter, and then the following year I qualified again for the European Championships, and this time it was to be held in Greece, in a place called Serres up near Thessaloniki in Greece. So the following summer I went across there and trained really, really hard, took my bike, and I came 4th this time, and yeah, that was about the pinnacle of my duathlon career. I think it was on a downward spiral from that point, but nevertheless it was a great 3 or 4 years where I trained really, really hard and got myself really, really fit. But I think that my passion for competing was outweighed by my desire to train. I preferred the training and the consistent exercise rather than getting myself mentally worked up for a race. Sometimes I'd turn up to races, and with all of the anxiety that goes on at the start line of a race, it would just be a little bit overwhelming, and I'd kind of get 3 or 4 kilometers into the race and think, do you know what, I just really want to go and have a cup of tea. And I actually did that one time, and I said to myself at the time, look, you in this for the right reason. And I think that was the start of the end of my kind of racing career. And every other bit of sport that I did from there on was more about fitness and personal enjoyment and mental tonic, really, I suppose. My other passion from an activity point of view has always been winter sports, specifically skiing. My hometown of Harrogate in Yorkshire had a dry ski slope, and when we were in the 6th form in the late 80s, we were allowed to go and do sports which were outside of the school gates. So myself and a few friends started skiing at the local dry ski slope. And this was great fun for a few years. We didn't have the money to go skiing in the Alps on proper snow, but we satisfied ourselves for a few years honing our skills on the dry ski slopes. And then when I was at university from 1988 to 1991, I had a friend whose father was actually the chaplain of a really posh school in Switzerland called Aiglon College. And as part of his posting, they had a chalet up in a place called Diablerets in the Swiss Alps. And in 1991, I went over and joined my friend for a week skiing on real snow, which was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed it. And all those skills that I'd learned on the dry ski slope were really put to good use on proper snow, and it was so much easier. I enjoyed it so much. So from that point on, from 1991 onwards, this had really sowed a seed in my mind. This was a thing that I could kind of make my own. And skiing has been a consistent in my life for the last 30 years. Initially in the early 90s, it was about going to resorts and skiing on piste and just challenging myself on all of the kind of red, blacks, anything you could kind of get your hands on, and skiing fast. That's what it was about when I was in my 20s. As I got into my 30s, I got a little bit more discerning, I guess, about where I went skiing and the type of skiing I was doing, and it became more about challenging myself in the environment as well, and skiing areas which were off-piste, backcountry, learning about winter skills such as avalanche awareness, skiing responsibly and safely. And so this has become a really important part of my life, and something which has given me a great deal of enjoyment. And in the latter kind of 10-15 years or so, I spent many weeks of the year skiing and trying to get better at backcountry skiing. So all in all, I've led a very active life, and activity, particularly outdoor activities, have always played a large part of my life, and certainly my mental well-being as well. But all of that, and I've always taken for granted a little bit my health and my fitness. When my dad passed away in 1992, I made a promise to myself to look after myself, try to eat the right things, try to take the right amount of exercise. And sometimes I probably took that to extremes. I certainly did in my early 30s, where I got myself down to under 10% body fat when I was training really hard. My normal weight is around 74 or 75 kilos, and I got down to 69 kilos. And one or two people would say that I actually looked ill, and that secretly used to make me feel quite happy, because when I looked a bit ill, a bit gaunt around the face, it normally meant that I was my racing weight. But possibly long term, it wasn't doing me any good. But when you're young, you're bulletproof, you keep going. And I was probably oblivious to anything that was going on inside of my body. I just expected my body to be able to keep me going, because I trained it to what it was. I'd certainly had no signs that there was anything wrong with me physically. I'd had no past history of any health issues, whether that's aches, pains, back pains, circulatory issues, all of the things that you would kind of associate with a very active lifestyle. On the odd occasion, You would get the odd grumble, a backache here and there, or you'd get in the car and after having spent a lot of time in the car, have back pain the next day. You'd think, oh, blooming heck, I don't want to do that journey. But then it would go within a couple of days. So there was nothing that led me to believe that there was anything about my health that was out of the ordinary. I was always very conscious that my father had a couple of heart attacks, and this was something that played constantly on my mind through the course of my life, to make sure that I kept an eye on my cholesterol, my blood pressure, the amount of alcohol I was consuming. Certainly I'd never been a smoker, which my dad was. But in the back of my mind, I always thought that it might be heart or circulatory issues that may be my downfall at some point, and I'd need to keep an eye on it. And certainly as I got into my early 50s, it's something that very much did play on my mind. As I mentioned before, my dad passed away at 59, and when I got to 50, it's something that kind of preys on your mind. And I know that when my dad was getting towards 57, 58, there was one Christmas where he did actually go very quiet, and we said, Dad, what's wrong? And he said, look, I'm 59 next year, and my father actually passed away at 59, and this was something that was playing very heavily on his mind. And I guess it also played very heavily on my mind as I got into my early 50s. But you just carry on, don't you? You can't let these things consume you. You just try to do the right things, and you try to have a full and active life and enjoy your life. We got to the start of 2022, and I'd been away on a couple of skiing holidays, and I think the last skiing trip that I did in the early part of 2022 was in the March, and there was one day on that trip where I twisted a little bit awkwardly, just trying to be clever, just trying to do something that I thought I could do, and it gave me a little twinge in my back. And the following morning I woke up and I had a little bit of back pain, and that morning I was due to attend a course, and I met up with my instructor, and there were several other guys. We were on a backcountry training course, and one of the first things he asked was, "Is anybody carrying any injuries?" And normally in the past, I've always been a little bit gung ho, and I'd be thinking, yeah, I've got a bit of a twinge, but hey, it's nothing. We're fine. Let's get cracking. But this time I was still having a little bit of pain from my back from the previous day, and I said, well, yeah, I'm actually carrying an injury or a suspected injury, and so I'll just take it easy if that's okay. But that was the first little sign that there might be an issue that I was unaware of. I'm actually going to end the video here at this point, at the start of 2022, because this was the point at which my life changed significantly, and it changed forever. You'll probably get a clue from the name of the channel what might have happened to me from that point at the start of 2022. But that's a subject that I want to discuss in a lot more detail, and with a view to looking at different aspects of what happened to me during that time and what's happened to me in the following 2 years. So for the time being, thanks very much for watching. If you've liked this video, then please do like and subscribe and keep an eye out for further videos to come. Bye for now.